Well, hello there, and welcome to Black Hammer Artisan. Today I'm going to be sharing the blacksmithing basics, what you need to have, and what you need to know to begin blacksmithing. Medievally, and to the best of my ability, it's modern alternatives. And I'll tell you this ahead of time. It's not as complicated or as expensive as you probably think. So, there's 4 primary things you're going to need, and these are the most fundamental blacksmithing tools you'll ever have. With these tools, theoretically, you can make all the other tools you need, although I don't recommend that you do that straight off the bat. I think that buying some of your first tools provides a better start for a blacksmith, and you will learn through your blacksmithing journey how to make your own tools. So the 4 things are a forge, an anvil, a hammer, and a pair of tongs. You will need a forge to heat your material, tongs to hold it with, an anvil to lay it on, and a hammer to smite it with. Fun fact, the word smith actually comes from a German word that means to smite. So basically, how the forge works is you have these 2 bellows that pump air into the forge. They're pumped by these handles. And then this charcoal, which is sitting in here, has a fire in it. As the air pumps in, it makes the fire hot, and you have heat. In the near future, I'll be coming out with a video on how you can build this and how I built it. It's absolutely, you cannot do blacksmithing without it. It's the most important tool in blacksmithing. It's why it's called forging. Right, so I prefer a solid fuel forge, particularly a charcoal forge, but the modern alternative is something like this Mr. Volcano propane forge. It's a very affordable forge, works very well, and as much as I don't really like propane that much, this works. I can pull off forge welds, very affordable, cost $80 at the posting of this video. And if you want to know more about it, head over to Roy's channel, Christ-Centered Ironworks. He's done a lot of testing on these. They send you a kit, you assemble it, it's very easy, and I'll leave a link in the description to it. So obviously another option is you could build yourself a forge. This is a dilapidating little forge that I brought out. This was my first forge. I built this myself. Worked very well. And I'm not going to get into comparing which one was better out of this one and Mr. Volcano. I think this was slightly cheaper to build, but probably more work to build. For my purposes, I think it worked a little better, even though the chamber was a little smaller. It's made out of some fire bricks. This is a railroad tie plate on the bottom and another one on the top. Some pieces of all thread going through like this. And a little forge burner. It's about ready to fall out of the side. I learned how to make this type of forge from a video put out by the Essential Craftsman, and I definitely recommend you go and watch that if you are interested in making a forge like this. Now I gotta go stick this thing back up on a shelf. It's heavy. So, this is one of my anvils. I've been very happy with it so far. This is an Achio anvil. Got it from VEVOR. I'll leave a link in the description to it. But this cost me nearly $200, and if you are familiar with anvils nowadays, the price has gone way up since the hobby of blacksmithing has become much more popular. This is probably close to $700 at most places, but it cost me $200 to get it, and it's still that price at the posting of this video. So the important attributes of an anvil are the hardness, the weight, and the shape. If it isn't hard, you'll notice if I tried to smith on this stump, it wouldn't work very well. The metal would, number one, burn it, but it would also push down into it even if I hit cold metal on this, and it has no rebound. When I hit on this anvil is helping me lift my hammer back up. Also, because it is hard, less vibration escapes down into the anvil. When you hit it, power is escaping down through and into the block and into the ground. So the harder your anvil is, the less power escapes. With this, a lot of power escapes. With this, very little. So it's hard, it's heavy, and it's shaped right. The horn I can bend around. This tapered heel here, I can bend things over it at all kinds of different widths. There's also London anvils. They're great. I have them too. But I do like this double horn design better. That's just a matter of preference. Weight is very important because the heavier your anvil is, the more mass will be not allowing that vibration and power to escape. If you had, like, say, a very thin plate on this stump, it'd be better than the stump itself, but if I hit it, a lot of power would go straight through it into the stump and you'd lose a lot of power. Number 3, hammers. This is my favorite hammer. This is a really good hammer. When you're starting out, I recommend you get a cross peen hammer. That's what this is. And the reason is because you can use the face for ordinary, what you would expect. You know, you flatten out, you draw out. then you can use the peen as a very aggressive drawing tool because all this power is concentrated into a very thin area. So when you strike, it's a lot in one spot, moving the material much more quickly than the face would. There's lots of different kinds of hammers. There's a cross peen, this is a rounding hammer, this has a flat face and a round face, this is a ball peen hammer, and I use them all, although the cross peen is definitely my favorite. But now I want to talk about hammer sizes, and that is, if you're starting out, you're an average guy, or maybe you're a lady, I would recommend you start with something more like a 2-pound hammer. Oftentimes you could go as high as a 3 starting out, but just be careful. Hammer technique is super important. If you're a big guy, you may, like me, often use this 4-pound hammer. But again, just be careful. Use the right technique. You don't want to give yourself tendonitis. There's a lot of old smiths out there that got tendonitis, and it hurts. Even though you can, don't go crazy swinging something like this. This is a big old 8-pound hammer. I've been smithing for several years. I do use a hammer like this sometimes, but I use it with correct technique, and that's important. If you start out using a hammer like that, you're not going to have perfect technique from the first day, and you're going to wind up hurting yourself. Don't do it. Start with something smaller. Number 4, tongs. As a blacksmith, you'll collect all kinds of different tongs, but you don't need to start with all these. The ones I would recommend you start with is these. They're called wolf's jaw tongs. Sometimes they're called bolt jaw tongs. They have a V-bit. That's the most useful kind I have found. And these are extremely versatile while still being able to hold on to particularly square and round stock really, really well. They can hold pretty much anything. This is what I started out with. I was recommended this by Essential Craftsman, and they've been great. These cost about 35 bucks, and they are worth every penny of it. I'll leave a link in the description. Technically, my first actual tongs were these, and they were generously given to me by my brother, along with this hammer. And they worked, you know, it was all right. But these were my first proper tongs, and they're definitely what I recommend you start with. You may have seen someone start using like pliers, or in this case, modified horse hoof clippers. Just don't do it. It's not the way to start. You want to start with a good set of tongs, and you can make your own later. Real quick, I'll give you a little rundown of the sorts of tongs I would recommend you add to your kit when you start doing that. As I said, these are a good way to start. Something like this. These are some round-jawed bolt jaw tongs, so they're going to hold some sort of bar a little bit better than this, but they still work pretty well. These are, as far as I know, there's some sort of block gripper pickup type tongs, and they hold big stuff like that very well. I actually use these to hold on to spring steel when I'm forging axes out of that, but as you can see, they're basically flat bit tongs that hold big stuff. These are your regular flat bit tongs. They hold on to bar. More flat bit tongs. These are a little smaller. You'll have all kinds of adjustments and more pickup tongs. So for those of you who want prices, I'm going to list some prices that will be generally accurate as of this video. If you build an earthen forge and bellows, it's relatively free, pretty much. The Mr. Volcano is the modern alternative. It's cost about $80 plus residual cost of propane, whereas charcoal you can make them in your backyard or buy for pretty cheap at your local store. The anvil that I showed you earlier, as I said, cost me almost 200 bucks. That's a really good price. I want to warn you against something, and that is a lot of you, if you've been looking for anvils, may have seen a Harbor Freight cast iron anvil, or on VEVOR you may have seen a cast iron anvil, or on Amazon. They're all over the place. Don't get them. They're terrible. They have pretty much no rebound at all. They can explode. Yeah, just don't do it. Don't get a cast iron anvil. But if you can't afford a big anvil like mine, or relatively big, it's really not that big compared to a lot of anvils, you could go for a cheaper option. VEVOR also sells a 66-pound anvil. I recommend you don't go any smaller than that because you get too small, they don't have the rebound you need. It's $160. You could also use something like this bit of railroad track as an anvil. Works very well. This is about 60 pounds. You know, they're very hard. They work very well. You could use any random chunk of steel like this one here. This is one that my dad gave me. Thanks, Dad. You'll never run out of things to hit as a blacksmith. This, I actually don't use as an anvil. I use it as a swage block because it has this convenient round hole in it. But if you see a big chunk of steel, grab it. If you want to know more about VEVOR anvils, Roy over at Christ Centered Ironworks has done extensive testing on them. Your first pair of hammer and tongs should be roughly $15 to $20 for the hammer and roughly 30 to 35 bucks for the wolf's jaw tongs. Again, V-bit wolf's jaw tongs, and I recommend a 2 to 3 pound cross peen hammer. And ask around, ask your friends, ask your neighbors. You never know. Your neighbor might just have, you know, a rusty old anvil in his garage that his grandpa used that he never used anymore. When I was getting into the craft, my sort of adopted uncle had one sitting in his trailer and gave it to me right off the bat. So that's the tools you need, the fundamental tools you need to start medieval blacksmithing. So now I want to tell you kind of the next couple steps in getting your kit together. What tools should you buy after you have these basic fundamentals? And the first one is a vise. So as you can see, I have a beautiful blacksmith vise. If you don't know, this is called a blacksmith vise or a post vise or a leg vise. I have a lot of names, and they work really well. The idea of this sort of vise is that it travels all the way down to the ground, so when you hit it with a hammer, you don't lose all the force and you don't break your vise and you don't break your workbench. It just lasts. You can weave living daylights out of this thing. This thing's over 100 years old, still going strong. Great vise. So a cheaper alternative, though not really a modern alternative to a leg vise, is something like this bench vise. I think I bought this for 60 bucks. You can probably get them as cheap as like 30 at a local store. Great little vise, definitely do its job. But again, a leg vise is a better option objectively. It doesn't matter if you want to do medieval or modern blacksmithing. It's better, but this will do the job. So there's all kinds of other blacksmithing tools such as power hammers, presses, swage blocks, and all kinds of other things, many of which they did have back in the medieval ages, such as old water-powered power hammers and fly presses. Those are all great tools, but you don't need them, and they're not even really crucial for blacksmithing, but they're just very handy and they speed things up. But we'll be getting into those in later videos, and for now I'd like to end out on the 7 processes of forging. I will be doing a short video on each one of these processes, but for now, the 7 processes of forging are drawing out, which is making something longer and thinner. Number 2, upsetting, the process of making something shorter and fatter, essentially. You usually put it on the anvil and you hit it on the top to squish it down and make it shorter and fatter. Number 3, punching, usually done by holding some manner of punch on top of something you want to punch and striking it with the back of the hammer. Number 4, cutting, either done usually with a chisel and you strike it like that to cut off the end of a piece, or you drop this into the hardy hole of your anvil so it stays still while you place a piece over top of it and then strike it with a hammer. Number 5, bending, usually either done by putting it over the edge of the anvil and striking, or by locking it in the vise and bending. Number 6, twisting, also pretty self-explanatory. You usually lock it in the vise, although there are other ways to do it. You grab it with a pair of tongs and twist it. And the final one, number 7, forge welding. This one's a little more complex than all the rest, but I do believe it to be a fundamental skill. I struggled with this when I first started out, and I definitely say if you can get this mastered when you're starting out, all the rest of blacksmithing will be far easier. If you can, learn it from an in-person, but if you can't, you can learn it off YouTube. You essentially take 2 pieces, and there's various ways you can do it, but you put them on top of each other, and when striking them, they forge weld. You have to get them up to a high enough temperature to do that, which is hard to achieve sometimes. Also, kind of a bonus thing, this isn't the process of forging, but it is one of the most important processes you will need as a blacksmith, is heat treating, which is essentially, in a nutcase done, and I will do a separate video on this at some point where I delve more into the complexities of it. You will heat a piece up to critical temperature, and that critical temperature is where it becomes non-magnetic. You will then slowly let it cool in the air without, you don't quench it, you don't do anything to speed up the quench, or the cooling down process. You do that 3 times. You heat it up, critical temperature, and let it cool. Then you take it out, again, critical temperature, quench it in either oil or water or something like that usually, which rapidly cools it, that hardens it. When you pull it out of that quench, it's gonna be too hard. It's gonna be brittle. Then you will do what's called tempering, and that is to heat it up just enough to where it becomes colorful. It gets usually either a blue or a brown or a yellow, something like that, and that will arrest the hardness back a little bit to where it is just right. It's no longer brittle, but it's no longer soft either. It'll hold an edge, but not be so hard that it breaks. Do not do what they do in all the Hollywood movies, which is take it straight off the anvil into the quench. It doesn't work. You certainly don't do that for hardening purposes. The only time you would really ever do that is if you need to grab onto, like, say, the end of it. You might be hammering on it. You need a hammer on the other side, so you quench off that side a little bit. Not enough to harden it, but just so it gets cool. Then you grab onto that, and you can hammer on it. So another great tool that you're gonna want as a blacksmith, although it's not absolutely fundamental, is a workbench. And that's what you see right here. And essentially, my first workbench was actually just 2 sawhorses with a piece of plywood thrown over the top. That worked, not super great, but it did do the job. This is a much better workbench and something like maybe what you would want to build, which is, these are boards on the top of 4 legs. There are cross members going between the legs, and then underneath there's a little shelf where a board goes across the bottom and then another one across the back. And the reason why that one across the back is important is it gives it sideways rigidity. So you definitely want to do that if you do build one. The next thing I want to talk about is proximity. You want to make sure that your forge is close to your anvil so you can quickly come out of the fire and hit. You don't have to walk across your shop losing heat the whole way and endangering yourself in case you trip or something. You want your tools to be pretty close to your anvil so you can quickly change tools from the anvil. Another important thing, you don't want things to be too close. You want to be able to make sure that you can easily walk all the way around your anvil, because you're going to have to use different aspects of your anvil more effectively. But the rest of your setup is really kind of going to depend on you. Where's your workbench? Where's your tool shelves? Where's your vise? Those things all kind of depend on how you work in your workflow, because how your workflow runs is going to be different than mine. The tools you use the most are going to need to be closer, and that means that the less often used tools are going to need to be a little farther back. So you may think this ironic since I'm a YouTuber and I'm teaching you how to blacksmith from a YouTube video. But one thing I will absolutely say, and this is not about me, this is about you. If you want to learn how to be a good blacksmith, you can learn off YouTube. But if you know anyone, or you look, try and find someone in your area that teaches classes, blacksmithing classes, or just even if he doesn't, an old blacksmith, come and sweep his floor. If you can learn from an actual blacksmith, do it, because you're going to learn so much faster, and you're going to learn all these tips and tricks that I'm leaving out because I don't remember on video. So another little bonus point, this is an incredibly useful tool, whether you're shaping handles or hot rasping. If you don't know what that is, hot rasping is usually where you lock something in the vise or hold it whatever way you do, and you rasp on it when it's hot. This will pull metal off a piece of steel pretty much like wood. It pulls it off really good, and it's like a medieval version of grinding. So even if you do stuff modernly, this is still an extremely useful tool, but especially if you want to go medieval, this is an extremely useful way to grind your surfaces. And lastly, I want to talk about safety. This is pretty simple, pretty basic, but I just want to make sure that everyone is careful because it is dangerous. You can easily set your shop on fire. So you want to make sure that your roof and your walls are a safe distance from your forge and anything else that can catch on fire. You want to make sure that it stays away. Just be safe. Wear gloves. Mainly, I don't wear gloves on your hammer hand. That's a waste of time. But I would recommend that you usually wear gloves on your tongs hand, because that's the hand that's going to get burned if a hand will get burned. Be careful, because I have been burned. And as a blacksmith, you probably will get some minor burns, but if you're smart, and I wasn't always smart, you'll avoid any bad burn. Sometimes you don't need gloves. You don't always want to have gloves because you can be more sensitive without them. The other thing is also an apron. A blacksmith apron, blacksmiths used them throughout all of history for a very good reason. I have one. I would definitely recommend that you use one. It's just a leather apron that covers your body and keeps you safe from fire and scale and that sort of thing. So I hope you found that helpful if you're getting into blacksmithing. If you're not getting into blacksmithing, it's a great craft and I hope this inspired you. Please consider subscribing to the channel because, as I said, I have a whole lot more videos coming that'll help people like you, and I wouldn't want you to miss them. But for now, farewell, wherever you fare.